Good evening again, ladies and gentlemen, children of all ages. In tonight's Unity tutorial, I am going to show you how to make a mesh but have each vertex have its own color. So instead of textures, I'm going to use colors. The simplest example of doing this, of course, is with the simplest mesh, which is a triangle, just one triangle mesh. And where is that triangle? Here it is. All right, so you can see each corner of the triangle, each vertex has a different color. And then Unity will just blend the colors between it. So how do you do that is going to be shown right now. I'll show you the script. So this is the mesh with one triangle. I just added the mesh color script. And then the script added the filter and the renderer. One thing you need is a material that you put on there. You need a particle material. So if I look at this material, it's different than the standard shader. It's not the where is it? It's not the standard shader. It's one of these particle shaders that I'm going to use because the particle shaders, you know, you could set colors even though the material has a color. So that's one of the restrictions, I guess you could say. All right. And then on the mesh script here, as you can see there, it's just an empty game object, and I put the mesh color script. Let's look at the mesh colors script. And here is the mesh color script. It's just making a one triangle mesh. So here's where you pass in the material in the inspector window for the mesh. Pass the material right there. And then privately inside the script, I have 3 arrays. There's always these arrays, the vertices and the triangles. All right. Now in the other procedural mesh tutorials, I had UVs because I was going to map a picture onto the triangles. But here I'm not going to map a picture on. I'm just going to set colors for each vertice. So I have a color array. Right now, for as many vertices as you're going to have in your mesh, you'll also have to have that same number of colors. So you could specify a color for each vertice. So here in the start function, I just define my 3 corners of my triangle. All right. In the vertices array, I define the 3 points. Then here in the triangles array, I say the order to connect the 3 points in. So it's 0, 1, and 2. Then I just say the color for each of the vertices. So for the color for 0 is red, green, and blue. The new color, this color object, it takes, RGB value, all right, and the values are between 0 and 1, okay? So it's like the red is like 0% or 1 is 100%, okay? So these could be fractions or floats for values there. Now, after I set the data for the mesh, it's a very simple triangle mesh, then I'm going to get the mesh object on the, on my empty game object, and then I'm going to set it. So in the get mesh, I just go ahead, and if I'm in the application editor, if I'm here in the Unity editor here, and I'm not in the built game, so here's like if I built the game. If I'm in the editor, then I use the shared mesh, and I get a new shared mesh. So here, if there's no mesh filter on this thing, then it adds a mesh filter, and it allocates a new mesh for the shared mesh, and then I just set my M equal to that. Otherwise, I use the mesh, if it's the actual built game, the exe of the game. So the mesh holds the mesh data, but also we're going to have a mesh renderer component. So here we check to see if there's one, and if not, we add it. And in the mesh renderer component, we set the material. All right, and remember, for the color vertices, we need a particle material. And then the get mesh just returns the mesh. Okay, and there you go, mesh equals get mesh M. Now I have the mesh. Now I could, with these 3 arrays here, I'm going to call set mesh. And set mesh is simply just going to, first for the mesh itself, it's going to clear all the data. And then I'm going to set these 3 arrays in the mesh itself, the vertices, the triangles, and the colors. And then I simply recalculate the bounds and the normals. The bounds are for the size of the mesh. The normals are the how the angle the light's going to shine on each triangle of the mesh. And tangents, I'm not exactly sure, but I think it's when you're going to use the lightweight render pipeline and make your own shaders. All right, so that's it. It's a real simple script to make this triangle. The thing to remember is you're going to be fulfilling the colors array on the mesh. So mesh object, this M, there's different arrays in here. M dot, there's the vertices, there's, let's see what else, there's colors, and there's colors 32. So if you wanted to do colors with the alpha value, so you could have transparency, you could use colors 32, and you set RGB and A for alpha. And there's normals in here too, I think, on the mesh object. Yep, there you go, normals, and the UVs, which I've used in the other videos, the UVs, and there's also a UV 2, 3, 4, and 5. I don't even know how to use these other ones yet. It could be like if you have multiple materials, I think that it's up to 8. I think it's that, but I'm not sure. And there's the vertices array. So anyway, you can see what the objects in mesh are. So I'm just using a different array, the colors. And I leave the UVs array alone. It's not even going to use that. And it makes a nice little triangle. And you're like, whoop-de freaking do. Like, so what? What am I going to do? I can make a triangle and have these colors on the corners. Well, I played around and I did some things with it. So here in example 2, let's see, scene number 2, here it is, scene 2, mesh, and I have mesh.colors too, in a different script. I'm going to use the marching cubes to generate a smooth terrain. It's marching cubes with linear interpolation. That's the file right here, marching cube. And let me press play to show you a fun thing you could do is something like this. So the mesh is generated, but the colors on the vertices are being set on each vertice, and I kind of smoothly change the colors, and you get something like this. So that's kind of cool, I thought. That's like one of the things I did, knowing I could change the vertex's colors on the mesh. And this is what the script looks like. Here it is where I'm building. I init the grid, and I set a noise value on each point in the volume of 3D space. Then I'm going to do the marching cubes. So that's what this does. When you use the marching cubes, as you could see in my other 2 videos, you need a grid of equally spaced points, like in a 3D volume in X, Y, and Z. And then it takes the grid cell by cell and figures out what each of the mesh triangles would be to make to fill in each of those spaces. So this does that. It gives a value for each of the points that would be, in the grid that you don't see. They're invisible. And now with each point having a value, each cell, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, it just, so for my script, I clear these 3 arrays. Then I set the grid cell that I'm currently looking at. So the D is the origin of the grid cell. That's like 0, 0, 0. And everything goes out from D. It goes forward, up, and to the right. And that's where all the other points come from. Then I could use the marching cube class that I have here and call isofaces. And I pass in this cell that says what the points are, and I pass in the surface level. Surface level is determining what is separating, what values are inside the surface or outside the surface. So here, I could change the surface level here, make it lower, and basically, there's less point values that are in the grid, so everything kind of goes down in this mesh. And if I make the values higher, that means there's more values that are in the mesh than out of it, and the mesh gets bigger. And you can see how my colors are changing. I'm going to show you how I figured out the colors part. So here I'm building the mesh, and then when I build the data for a cell, when I here I got the faces that are going to be, the triangles that are going to be, created for each cell. So here I build the mesh cell data, right? So I add the 3 points for each triangle. There's always 3. And then I add the triangles connecting the points. And then I add the color. So, I just used a little bit of mathematical algorithm here to do the colors for the Y. I'm using the height, basically. Based on Y, the colors are going to change. And that's how come, like, you can see in the picture, the higher ones are a different color, the lower ones are a different color. So that's one trick I did. Then another trick I did, let me show you my example 3. This is another way I use the colors. So here is example 3. Here's the mesh. Let me press play. And there's a mesh there. Let me just go to the scene view, and where is it? There it is. Okay, so there's a mesh there, and you can see it a little bit here. The colors are going from purple to blue, and it's based on each face it has the normals coming off of the face. So if the normals are anyway, I'll show you. Let me change the values a little bit here so you can see it more exaggerated. Blah, blah, blah. Here, the zoom level. So if I zoom out, if I zoom in, the Perlin noise algorithm, it's getting more samples of itself. So here, when the faces are pointing more to when the faces are pointing upward more, then it's more blue. When the normals of a face on the mesh are pointing not upwards, it's more red. So you see, that's like a thing I did here for this auto-generated procedural mesh. I use the normals to decide the colors. And I can change the surface level here too. Woo! The mountains grow, there's more red. And you saw the zoom level, it just changes how hilly or whatever it is. But what it's basically doing, I call it a zoom level because you see these 2 mountains here. As I zoom in closer, it's just basically sampling that area of the Perlin noise. As I zoom out, it's taking a greater sampling of the Perlin noise into this one grid. See, because it's the same mountains, they're just moving. So anyway, this is a little short tutorial. You could also set the colors on the vertices of your mesh. And these were 2 examples of fun things you could do with it. Bye. You made it to the end of the video. I'm so proud of you. This is my website. The main thing I want to show you is that for any of these videos that you've seen on YouTube, I have the tutorial section, which has the blue links for the projects, and the orange links are the files. Also, you could go over here and play some of the games we made in the game camp.